For my money, one of the most distinctive characteristics of the Palm Sunday liturgy takes place at the very beginning. I mean, obviously later on there's the Passion narrative, but again, more to the point, at the very beginning, we recall collectively the triumphant procession of Jesus Christ into the holy city of Jerusalem. So as you might recall, he enters in on that donkey, and they lay palm branches at his feet, hence Palm Sunday, and they're singing his praises. Hosanna to the Son of David, the King of Israel. And I might suggest that at this particular moment in time, Jesus Christ, even though he knows that the cross is obviously just around the corner, his heart is filled with joy. It's brimming with joy. And not because people are singing his praises, but rather because truly it is his honor and his privilege and his joy to suffer and die for the salvation of the world. Now, perhaps that might sound kind of strange, but let me explain the thing by way of etymology, right? So think, for example, about the word passion, right? So the word passion actually has two meanings. So first of all, think about the romantic connotation, right? The desire for union. Think about the sexual act. Think about the marital act, right? So there's that. But the second complementary definition of the word passion is suffering. So think about that Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ, right? And so the whole point, though, is that when it comes to the person of Christ, these different definitions with regards to the word passion, they're complementary. They coexist. They denote the fact that Jesus Christ's desire for union with us is so great, so powerful, he actually suffers. Now, to engage in another word study, think about the notion of love, right? And so in English, there's obviously only one word for love, and that obviously is love. But when it comes to the original Greek, the language in which the gospel is written, there's actually 4 words for love, right? So there's agape, typically held to be perfect love, right? Sacrificial, godlike love. Storge love, which denotes a certain familial love, like I'm your mother and I love you because I have to. Philios love, which is sort of a friendship love. And then finally, there's eros love, this desire for union. Now, take it back to the person of Christ, right? So Jesus Christ is obviously God, one in being with the Father, right? And God is love. And so as a result, people typically assume that Jesus Christ simply is agape love, which again is perfect, godlike, sacrificial love. But the reality is that Jesus Christ actually embodies all 4 types of love. So certainly he's willing to suffer and die and lay down his life for the salvation of the world, so the very embodiment of agape love. But at the same time, he's also our brother, he's our friend, he's our father. And more to the point, he's also the embodiment of eros love, even though it sounds kind of strange. Again, his desire for union with us is so great, so powerful, he actually suffers. And if you think about it in a certain sense, that's one of the main takeaway messages with regards to this image of Jesus thirsting on the cross, right? And so you recall how just moments before he dies, he cries out, "I thirst." And what is he thirsting for? Not so much water and wine, but instead he thirsts for us. He thirsts for the people of God. He thirsts for a union with us. Again, his desire for union with us is so great, he is literally dying with thirst. And that's why it's no coincidence that, for example, when it comes to the missionaries of charity, Mother Teresa's order, their mission statement is not so much to bring about a particular change in the context of the social fabric of society, but instead their mission is to satiate the thirst of Christ on the cross by feeding and addressing and loving the poorest of the poor. Shades of the parable of the sheep and the goats, right? Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you also do it unto me. Okay, now at this point, a bit of a side comment. So I have to admit that when I was writing this homily, I was afraid in a certain sense that people would reduce the whole point of the homily simply to being this reminder about the primacy of love. But I would suggest that to do so would obviously kind of miss the point. And so I would suggest that the whole point of the homily is to simply say this. Even though there is, for all of us, always this recurring temptation to go the way of darkness and selfishness and sin, the challenge and the invitation is to go the way of the light. The light has to be brighter. Your generosity has to be greater. Your love has to win. Your love must be not just great, but actually perfect. So shades of 1 John chapter 4, right? Perfect love casts out fear. Okay, I want to end now with a couple of examples, right? And so the first example that comes to mind, I remember once hearing this story about this guy who was struggling with sexual sin. And sexual sin obviously is symptomatic of a number of things, but primarily in a certain sense, it's symptomatic of a certain turning in on oneself. So shades of original sin in the book of Genesis, right? I don't really believe that God will come through for me, so I need to live habitually out of the stance of self-protection, right? And what is that but, again, a certain turning in on oneself? Symptomatic of all sin, but sexual sin in particular. In any case, this guy who was struggling with sexual sin, he went to this priest for confession. And this priest, I guess, had seen him before with regards to this particular issue. And in response to his confession of sexual sin, the priest posed to him a question. And the question was basically this. When did you stop being generous? When did you stop being generous? And so instead of giving him advice and tips as to how to avoid this particular type of behavior going forward in the future, he kind of put his finger on the real root of the problem. Your light needs to be brighter. Your generosity needs to be greater. Your love needs to be perfect. because perfect love doesn't just cast out fear, perfect love casts out sin. Okay, one final example, and I'll kind of end with this. And so when it comes to the marriage ritual book, the ritual book that bishops, priests, and deacons use to marry people, to marry couples, there's this thing called the exhortation before marriage. And it's optional, but it's beautiful, right? So in my own experience, whenever I've read it, people have found it to be extremely moving because it's an official reflection by the church on the nature and joys of marriage. And so it begins precisely by talking about that, the joys of marriage. But then it transitions to the notion of sacrifice. And so what it says with regards to sacrifice is often difficult, even irksome. But love makes it easy. And perfect love makes it a joy. And then the exhortation goes on to make this extraordinary statement. And I'll kind of end with this. So basically what it says is that when a couple, and by extension any member of the holy people of God, learns to live habitually out of the stance of true love and perfect sacrifice, they will come to experience the pinnacle of human joy permitted on this earth. And the rest, quite frankly, is left to the hands of God. And may God bless you all.